Welcome, everyone, and good evening to this another virtual DDD meetup. This time, we're doing a meetup with The Edge, together with The Edge, and it's about the long-term impact of architectural design decision. With me of the virtual DDD is Marco, Christina, and Maxime. Hello. And today we have a panel talking about the long-term impact of architectural design decisions. So we're going to go, well, hopefully on my screen is from left to right. We're going to start with Yves. Would you want to do a short introduction and why you're here? And go ahead.
So I'm Yves. I work at Event Store. But before that, I've been for a really long time in specific domain for more than 10 years. And I've seen it evolved and made some decisions, some good, some bad, but they all implied, they all were like years later, not immediately. And I've seen decisions being made and have to live with the consequences of them after people have left, which is also a nice thing happening.
Which we see in your background, right?
Yes.
A nice architectural diagram. Thanks. So James, you're up next.
Hi, so I'm James. I work with Yves at Event Store at the moment. I am perhaps a little bit unusual in this group in that I haven't spent years and years at one particular place, but I do keep in touch with places where I have worked and have been back into some of those places as well to see the effects of decisions that I and others made on the ground and how they survived without the original owner of the decision being there.
Great, thanks. Jeremy?
Yes, so I'm an architect at The Edge. This is a company that is working for the hospitality industry. And I've been working there for the last 14 years. So that's quite a long time for the industry, I think. And so, yes, I took some decision 14 years ago that still have a large impact today. And we started with, when I joined the company, we were something like 15 people, and now there is more than 120 developers in the company. So it's moving fast. There is a lot of things happening every day on the system, and I have to get care of that. So yeah, that's quite challenging.
Yeah, I can imagine now these 100 people are dealing with decisions you made earlier on and your colleagues. Thanks. Thomas, you're up next.
Thanks, Kenny. I'm Thomas. I'm also an architect working at Flixbus currently. Yeah, and I'm also working more than 9 years. I mean, 14 years that's Methusalem area. But 9 years, I also had some good insights on how decisions, early decisions, late decisions, decisions in any point in time have always needed a lot of time to actually show themselves and show their impacts, because normally they're just, glimming under the hood until, some kind of activity thing has been reached, and then suddenly they erupt and show themselves. So I'm here to tell a little, some stories that I have seen, and yeah, hope for a good conversation tonight.
Thanks. And last but not least, Chris, can you...
How you doing? I'm also currently with Event Store with Yves and James, but I've been architecting and building systems in many industries for a very, very long time now. And I've got the full collection of scars and bad decisions and things I've regretted from various places that I'm more than happy to talk about. And actually a lot of that, started way earlier, and some interesting stuff I did in telecom as I was thinking it through to get ready for this about, where I found myself owning decisions I didn't realize I had made.
Thanks. And I know, Marco, you're also joining in because you've spent, I don't know,
yeah,
a lot of
I
years
think,
at the same
I'm not
company.
sure if I'm the oldest Methusalem here, but 14 and a half years actually in the same company. And I had a very short break in between. And I've lived with bad decisions of people who were there before me. And then I've made a lot of bad decisions once I was there. And then when I quit, that was like 6 or 7 years into the job. I quit and I had to rush a lot of things so I can get out easy and set them up for success after I'm gone, right? And then I came back, took the team lead, and now had to live with my own cheap decisions from before, which really sucked. So I was like, hey, imagine somebody else would have taken this job. Oh boy. And yeah, now after 14 years and modernizing everything using 10 different architectures, frameworks, and whatnot, the whole team left at some point due to political reasons. And now the new team that's there has to live with everything we've done, which is the worst scenario they could have ever imagined because, well, we can talk about that story a bit later, but yeah, that's my experience so far.
Good, thanks. So for everyone else in the meetup, thanks for joining. Also on YouTube, we have people. You can post questions any way you like and interact any way you like. There's a Zoom chat, there's a Miro board, there's a YouTube chat. You can raise your hand in Zoom, or you can just unmute yourself and see if you can barge in the conversation, right? Everything is fine. But it all started with Yves posting something on Twitter where Jeremy, you answered with, right? And I think Yves, you had the first question here, which was, well, maybe you can go ahead and kick off the conversation.
Oh, yeah. So the question is, when did you realize in your career that actually what we do has short-term impact? You know, you build a feature and something is building and it's running and everybody is happy, but actually there's things that can happen way later. And I'm going to tell my story. It was in the leasing sector about 20 years ago. We were automating decisions, and the main risk analyst or the boss of the risk team there was always asking data, give me more data about what you're building and give me more data about what we have now in production. And I was asking why? Why do you need the data? So I went to his desk and asked, okay, tell me what you do with the data, because if you do something with it, you need it. Oh, it's just to see if what you have in the system is correct, because, you know, in 2 years' time, we will know if your system is okay-ish. And in 4 to 5 years' time, we will know if it actually works. Meaning in 2 years' time, that's the first time statistically where they get payment that are not done. And in 4 or 5 years' time, they get their asset back or not. And be it in leasing, getting the asset back and putting in on the second margin, on the second life market is where they make the margin, or a huge part of the margin. So that was the first time I heard something like, oh, what I'm doing here can maybe kill a company in 5 years' time. Little did I know at the time that it was not my decision to make that system, but it was the company's decision. So it was not really my decision, but I took it on my heart like, okay, from that point on, it was, okay, I'm doing stuff now, but how is it going to impact later on, and not in 6 months, in like 2, 3, 5, 6 years. That's kind of the first time I realized this.
In my case, the realization came with the growth of the company. Because when I joined the company, that was a small startup with a few developers, and we had a lot of technical stuff to solve due to technical debt and all that. And at the beginning, you start with a decision to solve the immediate problems. And at some point, you took some decision, and your decision were not necessarily bad, but they are not sufficient because once you have doubled the load and everything is changing faster, what you did was not especially wrong, but it's not enough anymore. So you have to come back on your decision and do it again. And when you do that the first time, okay, that's just new problem to solve. But actually, you start to realize that in a few years, it will double again. And so you can either start to future-proof and develop things that will be totally scalable, but actually it never happens because a lot of changes happen in the meantime. And so you have to take decision now, but that will not impact negatively in a few years your capacity to take the next step. So you start to have to think about your options in the future. And so sometimes you get it right and sometimes not that right. So yeah, this is where I started to, after between the first and second growth steps, this is where I really started to see that you have to be conscious about time that will affect your system over time. Yes.
I have a similar story. So it's also related to, I mean, it's always related to growing in my examples, because when I started as well, we were like, I don't know, like 20 people within the IT team. Now we're like 500 in the tech team at Flixbus, which is amazing scale. And I have seen it all. So I start with the very simple things, which is sharing code between different teams. So we thought it was a good idea in the beginning to have like a shared kernel, shared code, and actually not infrastructure code, but domain code, like domain entities. And we thought it was a good idea back then to actually share it, because like, okay, we have this one model right now. There is not a lot of bounded context right now. We're just evolving. And I mean, it was the right decision at that point in time, but it's very hard, like when you keep hiring and onboarding new people and continue to grow, to actually revisit these decisions regularly and actually have a look at them, and actually okay, every quarter or every half a year we should like go, like architecture decision records was not a thing back then. So there was no time for us to actually revisit these decisions. So this shared code, of course, after 1.5 years started to regularly break, because some team made a change and updated the version, and then another team made another change, and and things were falling apart. And that's also where that was the first time where I realized, okay, the decision we made back then, which was valid in the context of the time. So decisions don't have to be wrong, they can become wrong, right? So that's also something that I've seen. So the decision might be perfectly valid at a certain point in time, but then over time it becomes wrong. Yeah. And if you don't have a regular process, or I don't want to call it process, but the mindset to regular revisit the stuff you have done in the past, you things will start to fall apart. And that was for me, that was the first time in the context of Flixbus where I realized, okay, that decision really bite us in the ass, basically, a few years down the line.
So a question there before we move to someone else, because I find it interesting what you say earlier on. It feels that you talk about the past as if you say, I hear you say rationally, right? It was the good decision back then, but still, I hear some form of argumental excuses, and I can imagine that new people joining in will say, why did you do this? Do you get this a lot? Do you get that a lot?
It's oftentimes it really is the right thing at the time, because you can't take too much time building something that you may never need. If you try and cover all your features when you first implement, you're never going to get it done.
No, and what I mean is from Thomas, but correct me if I'm wrong, I still hear a bit of you're excusing yourself for making that decision back then. While it was the correct decision, but I can imagine you get a lot of pushback from new people getting into the company that says, why did you do it like this? What is this? What is this crap? Do you get that as a lot, staying in that company a long time?
Yes, you get this kind of question quite a lot. But the thing is that you have to attach to this decision the context and the limit of the decision, so that when you start to approach the limit, you can start to say, okay, it's time to change because we reach this limit. And actually, this is something we often forget to do. We do it, and we know that this is the right decision in a given context. It will move, and be ready to change when the context will change. And this is where I was talking about option. If you already know that things could move in this direction, and in this case we can change things like that, and if it changes in another direction, we have different options. Is where you can start to be ready. You don't activate this solution too soon because it would be costly and maybe useless. But being ready is very important, I think.
Yeah, I also think that, I mean, you said generating options when you know in which direction you want to go later. That's a helpful thing if you know, right? But even if you have no clue in which direction the system or the surrounding environment will evolve, being aware that there's inertia involved, right? There is systemic inertia. You can't just make the software system align with your new demands. It takes time to adjust. And the same thing goes for the company structure, for people. So being aware that everything you build has inertia, and the more complex it gets, the bigger the inertia will be, means designing for faster ability to change smaller components, loosely coupled and stuff like that, gives you the option to react when you need to react, right? So decisions that are the right ones right now can hurt you in the future. And that will always be the case, no matter what you build. But being aware that things have inertia, and then figuring out where do we need to be flexible and where it's not so important, I think that's one of the key factors that bounded context mapping, for example, can give you, to figure out how can we structure our system so that the core parts are simpler to change or faster to change and to adapt.
And sometimes even if you do all of that, and you make all of those decisions and you do the very best that you can, the company who's asking you to build the software changes direction, and none of your decisions could have been right anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a hand raised from Matthew. Matthew, go ahead.
Thank you. So I hear all this. Let me take my hand down while I'm thinking about it. I agree. The challenge I have found is, and I don't know what people call this in whatever company they're in, but often we call it the business. The people actually doing the work that we're providing the software to is convincing them like, hey, we need to take a month. You're not going to get any features. It's going to do the exact same thing it did before, but we're going to set ourselves up for the thing you want us to build next. And I think that was the real challenge for the developers, because you don't get trained on how to politic. You don't get trained on how to sell. You get trained on how to write code. And so I'm curious for people, how do you sell that idea to the people you're working with?
Good question.
So
Thanks.
If I can, one thing I've come up with recently, because I've been fighting with that for a very long time. I really feel your pain.
Who else has that, by the way, before Chris answer it? So we all feel the pain.
The thing is to
let Chris finish, Jeremy.
I've tried many of the standard approaches about it'll be better, but what I've really found when I'm having the conversation is to put it in financial terms. And I don't refer to it as code debt, I refer to it as depreciation, right? And so just like any other asset that I've invested in, over time it depreciates. And the only way to correct that is to reinvest in that fundamental asset. And the way depreciation shows up in software is it makes future features more expensive. So the more depreciated and out of whack it gets, the higher the cost for the next feature they want. So now you can have a conversation with them about, hey, we could do this and it's going to reduce the future costs. And that gets into, architecture is really buying arbitrages. So you can have a future features which you can opt into at the same cost now. So it's really the same conversation.
Actually, a really good analogy for this particular case, because this was at a large financial institution.
Yep.
And so technical debt, the idea of technical debt was actually the exact wrong term to use.
Right.
Because they say, like, well, we'll just hedge against it.
Yeah,
like debt
fine.
was fine. Debt's not a
debt
problem.
works.
Like debt's a feature. Debt is a feature to these people. I was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So I like that idea. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I want to add to that.
No, wait.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure, because Jeremy, you wanted to go, but if you, and then I see Christina, Marco.
Yes, I just wanted to say that you have to talk about value, and yes, depreciation of value is, but yeah, the value for there is technical value. For instance, if your system has a reliability problem, it has a cost. If it has performance problem, it has a cost. If development is slower, it has a cost. So you have to find a way to evaluate, not necessarily precisely, but globally, the cost incurred by not doing this work. And then, if you talk about cost and value,
there's one other really nice thing that this conversation does is I generally talk about, well, if you have a house and you bought the house, you wouldn't expect it to be, in 10 years to be the same. So all of a sudden, the technical debt isn't mistakes the dev team made. It's a natural process that occurs with any asset that you own. So it isn't, because that's the other thing you fight all the time as well. If you'd written it perfectly the first time, would this have happened? So you get out of that trap as well. And I can see two people have their hands up.
Yeah, and I wanted to, Thomas, so you wanted to add something small to the conversation before we go into Christina?
It's small because the cost is also not growing linearly, right? It's not that the longer you wait, it just grows linearly, and we just wait 3 months and then do it then, or we wait a year and then do it then, because it's going to be much more expensive in a year's time, because it grows not linearly but maybe exponentially or something in between, but it's not going to be the same cost you have when you do it right now or in a short time, right? So that's what I wanted to add, that this is not a linear function of the cost, but the cost is actually growing as much higher the longer you wait.
Every story you put on a weak foundation is more expensive to fix when you go back to fix the foundation.
Christina, go ahead. You are first in line, raising your hand.
Thank you. I had a lot of thoughts, but you will. So I think this is why we are here. My get on this is DDD. This is why we are talking about business-driven or domain-driven design and business-driven development. It is not only deciding or expecting that anybody understood this decay and this devaluation. We have to explain it what happens. And I saw both sides. The side saying, oh, if we don't change this database, then it won't work anymore. And it wasn't right, because it has worked. And after that, the feature was dropped, or the product was dropped. So it would have been a loss of time to invest in it. And at the same time, I explain always what's happening exactly. So we need a digital literacy from the business people to understand what's happening. Why we cannot put the gun on the breast and say, if I don't do this now, everything will die, because they won't understand it. So we have to explain how this value is dropping, and what happens if we don't do this next step. And we have to discuss about it, because maybe we are wrong. Maybe it is not so imminent, or maybe it will happen in 1 week, because we already waited 6 months and didn't say anything. So this conversation, I think, shouldn't go only on technical level, but it has to include the technical problems, because we are living and building a technical product. And this is where DDD is the place to go. We not only understand the business, but the business must understand what's happening. What is a technical product?
Yeah.
Why is something becoming broken? Nobody understands this. Why this doesn't work? Doesn't work anymore? Because we have 100 times more users, or 100-year-old computers, or whatever. So it is in the equation. It is in this discussion, the technical part and the business part, and our thinking. It has to be a negotiation, and not only one way or another, and maybe something in between.
Well, I guess that's also the power of the bounded context per se, that you can have the conversation in that shared language, right? So, Marco, I think you were wanted to add something. Thanks.
Yeah, I like what Christina said. So that kind of, I think it contradicts a little bit Chris's metaphor of building a house, right? Where you can say the asset is deprecating over time. I mean, that metaphor is still okay-ish valid, but software and a complex system is way more than a robust house, where you know the environment and you know the risk factors, and you can basically plan for deprecation. But software is built in a very complex environment where you don't know the technical constraints fully, you don't know the actual domain needs and the stakeholders and how everything will change over time. So it's this conversation that should happen before you start doing anything, right? Between domain experts, different stakeholders, finance department, and developers, and so on. And even then, there is still a lot of risk involved, which is why I try to put this discussion always in the risk versus opportunities department. So that was Matthew's point, right? How do you communicate this to people who don't understand the technology? Like, why did it change now? Why do we have to invest so much? Why do we need 3 months to build something without changing the how it's working from an outside point of view? And that's to reduce risk or to open up for opportunities, because we have built things to deliver in certain point of time. We wouldn't have ever been able to build the perfect system because we have no perfect information. So moving fast, experimenting, learning fast with feedback loops, and then always adjusting continuously, because the software development process is a continuous learning process that never ends, and you always have to adjust. But every decision you make takes a certain risk, right? You never know perfectly if it will work or not, especially in the complex domains where it becomes valuable, and it opens up opportunities. So it's always, and I think financial people will really appreciate that, people from a finance department. The thinking about risk and opportunity is what they do on a day-to-day basis. So explaining it like that, like every decision we make is like gambling on the stock market. If you have more information, it gets a better prediction, but it will never be perfect. So learn to speak their language when you try to sell it back to them. That helped in my context a lot. We weren't about finance at all, but understanding at some point how my boss and the other stakeholders were talking, they didn't understand technology at all, but using their language makes you seem more, well, it makes them understand you better.
So going into, before we go to you, Eric, because you raised your hand, one thing I'm noticing here is the use of metaphors to explain software, right? And they can be really pretty, because it's a sort of like a model, they can be really dangerous because, well, I'm not sure who said this, I'll come back to that, but building a house is like you're building the same thing, sort of like again and again. Building software, if it's already exists, you just copy paste it, which of course happens in Stack Overflow. So we're building new things. So that metaphor might, in the wrong hands, might be really dangerous or really powerful, right? I think that's a problem. Like you said, Matthew, it was a financial institution, so you're battling with their metaphors, and they will always win because they understand the metaphor better than you. I guess that's also a hard one as an architect. I can imagine.
Well, I mean, all metaphors are limited, right?
Yeah.
The house gets you so far, but it's not a perfect map of the terrain.
Yeah.
Right. And also, if you go to some of the houses I've owned were built in the 1800s here, and it's really not clear what's going on in them and what they've been through over time.
Yeah, you buy it, and all of a sudden you have 10,000K tech debt of I don't know what's in the house because nobody knows.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks. So Eric, you were raising your hands next.
There were several things that people were saying that agree with, I think that you hit one of the main points I wanted to make about the risk of the analogies. One of the points that a couple of people made is how multidimensional and unpredictable this is. So when we talk about technical debt, we have to be careful because debt, although there's some variation in debt, it is essentially a single dimension and money is fungible. Someone earlier was saying, you know, we need to talk about like the possibility of spending some time to prepare for the new features they want us to build now. You know, that's saying we need to invest a bit, but not in general, sort of like the foundation of a house, but specifically to prepare for the direction they want to go now. So apparently we know something now that we didn't know before about the direction of the system. And I think that is kind of a thing we have to watch for with metaphors. And I like to go back to concrete examples from the real, like, I think that if you work toward a place where you can explain to the business people, here's a feature that we have, and this is how it works. You know, go through an actual concrete example and explain what's happening in the system as the steps are done. Now, here's a feature that you want us to do. And if we try to do it within the framework of the existing system, here's how it will have to work. And then make that story sound painful. I mean, in a true way, right? If you can't do that, then you're not truly able to explain to them why you need to change some of the foundation of the system, right? You're restructuring so that the story of the next feature is not so painful. And I think being able to, and not in metaphor, I use metaphors all the time, but I mean, I think you have to move beyond the metaphor when talking to those business people and get a concrete example. If you can't make that thing, if you can't explain such an example to them that illustrates why building the new feature would be painful if you do it on the existing platform, then something's missing. Whether it's that you don't understand things well enough or they aren't the right people to be talking to, or anyway, I like to get to that point where we can illustrate the pain, and then we can really talk about an investment we have to make to change that. So that's kind of what I was going to say.
Is that also in your book? I know, Eric, you talk about more deep modeling and deeper concepts. Is that also what you're referring to? You're probably missing a concept to explain why it's so painful?
Well, I think it could be, you know, so part of it is this thing about not knowing the future. So we could have built quite perfectly clear, even deep concepts. And now we're venturing into an area that's simply not covered by what we had done before. A real discussion of it might conclude that if we start changing the system in a way that will make it work better for these new cases, we'll actually make it work worse for some of the old cases. These are two different sorts of problems and maybe should be handled with two different models. And so this could be a good conversation about, should we split off a new bounded context to work on this new set of problems? Maybe some of the problems we've been having recently is because we're trying to jam a new thing into an old sort of framework. So maybe we should create this new thing, and then once we've stabilized it, move some of the old stuff over into it to let the older system get nice again, because it's back to doing what it was originally intended to do. So on the other hand, it could be that we have new insight and we can deepen our model in a way that will handle the old cases very nicely and the new cases. Always feels good when you can do that, but it isn't necessarily the case, right? So if you just find that it's time to say we need a new, or it could be that you conclude that, well, we just made a mess of it. There's no excuse. we just made too many short-term decisions, and now working in this old system is just not feasible. And we need, if we want to do ambitious things, we need a fresh start, which doesn't mean building a new system. Doesn't mean rebuilding the system. It means creating a new context. All these things are possible. It's very tricky to overgeneralize, right? And some of those are underinvestment, like in some of the metaphors, and some of them are just businesses taking a turn. You can also really screw up a system if the business takes a turn and you keep cramming a really fundamentally different concept into the old framework. So anyway, that's what I was going to say.
Thanks. James, you're up next.
Yeah, I think it's kind of been covered off by previous people, but I really have a bit of a problem of calling changes to what we need to build now that are different to what we built at the beginning technical debt. It's a change to the system, not technical debt. And you shouldn't make the mistake of calling it that, because the business will hear exactly the opposite of what you want them to hear when you say that.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. I usually like to make changes business value, right? What does it do for your business? And add it. I don't like to have architectural stories on my backlog, because then it also means you can just not do them while you say, well, can't we just fit them somewhere here? Is that what you mean, James? Not just don't mention technical debt?
Don't mention technical debt. So to Eric's point earlier, if the answer is you made some decisions to take some shortcuts earlier that are now causing you problems, that is technical debt. That is literally what technical debt means. And you should own up to that. We made these decisions at that time. They were the right ones to get us to the point in market at the right time. There's nothing wrong with deciding to take on that debt at that point in time. But now we have to pay for it. That's a perfectly valid strategy. All of these things are perfectly valid. The other thing which I quite often hear, which is a subtle difference as well, is people talk about, oh, if we don't replace the database, there's a risk it will implode. The risk, for me, risk is always, what actually do you mean by implode? Our site will be down some of the time. We won't be able to process so many orders. Our Christmas sales will be impacted, that kind of thing. And so that's the consequence. But then there's the likelihood of it happening as well, because the business cannot make a decision about investing to deal with an upcoming risk without knowing how likely is it to happen and how much is it going to cost us to do it if we don't do it, because they've got to decide whether or not they want to pay the cost of doing it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So what's the business risk at stake here, right?
Yeah. But we often use risk to mean both of those things together, and sometimes it's useful to take them apart so that the company that you're talking to or the business that you're talking to can actually understand both parts of it.
Yeah. Thanks. Jeremy?
Yes, I wanted to talk about metaphors, because we were talking about metaphors. And I've heard Marco talk about inertia and Chris about depreciation through friction. And I was thinking about the work about physics of software done by Carlo Peciocchi, who I think is here tonight, about physics of software, which is an extended metaphor about software moved in time. And for me, it has been a very useful tool and metaphor in the same kind of tool as the word labels, for instance. And it has not been discussed much in the domain-driven design community. And the idea is to see, to look at the software as being, looking at your system as being an artifact space which has a shape in space at a moment in time. And the thing is that you will move this over time to another shape in another place, and it will not happen without applying forces on it, okay? So there will be some effort, some work done on this system to change its shape and to move it. And for instance, Marco was talking about inertia. And the thing is that if you have a large system, you can apply work on it, but it will move slowly due to its mass. Okay, so the size of your system, you have a proxy with something like the number of line of code or something like that. But let's imagine you have 10,000 line of code and you apply 1 year of work on it. You can expect it to have moved totally, and in 1 year it will be totally different, in a different shape. If you have 10 million of line of codes and you apply 1 person for 1 year, it will just be at the same place next year. Okay, it will not have changed at all. So there is a lot of if you see your system like that, for instance, moving a large mass like enormous rock, a mountain, and trying to move it as a single thing is very difficult. This is the classical monolith problem. And the thing is that if you cut it in smaller parts, this is the microservice approach, you can move small parts independently faster because they are small. There is less friction when you try to move them. If you have less friction, you need to have not too much connection with the rest, will create the friction in the movement. But at the same time, when we talk about the size of microservices, the thing is that you don't want to move sand. Okay, so if the parts are very small, this is like you try to move sand, and this is another problem which is complicated. So it's better to move small bricks with a regular size. It's easier to move if there are not too much connection on that. And on the way, you will have friction. You will have energy deperdition, and so work depreciation and all that. And you want to shape your system in a way that will enable you to move the important part together in a timely manner with less friction. And there is a lot of axes that will apply constraints on friction, like code that is together with a lot of interdependencies is difficult to move independently, but also the structure of the teams will create some friction in the way you will work. This is where you have Conway's law. Domain-driven design is also about creating the right separation, like bounded contexts, which will make independent parts that can be moved independently. And you know that changes will happen inside independent parts and all that. So this is really something I encourage you to read and to think about, because the question is, where is your system now? Where do you want it to be in 5 years, and how you will apply your work and effort? Where external forces will apply on your system, like connection with external system? How will they move? How will they break? And what will be the impact on the shape on your system in the future? So yeah, I think there's a useful metaphor. So yeah, not all metaphors are good, but some are useful. I wanted to share about this one.
Yeah, it's a nice. And would this be something that you might explain to what we were earlier talking about, to what people call the business side?
No, this is not a tool I would use with the business, but that like the Wordle maps, it gives you a vision in space and time of your system, so you understand better the move you have to do when some change must happen. So when you draw the structure of your system, you can see which parts are together, linked how, but you have to overlay it with multiple dimensions, like teams organization, interaction with the outside and all that. So this is more multiple maps, but with that, you can be more strategic about your moves.
Thanks. So I know Eric and Marco are exploring the virtual reality, maybe a different context map with a different model in virtual reality in 3D will help, perhaps with this metaphor. Who knows? Just putting it out there for someone to make it. I think Thomas.
3D VR is the solution to most problems.
Nice silver bullet.
True.
Good. So thanks, Jeremy, for that explanation. Thomas.
Yeah. So I love that Jeremy brought up physics of software, because I was a big fan of Carlos' work as well. I think he was speaking 2017 or at the DDD Europe, and I love the talk there. One addition before I want to talk about something different to Jeremy, is entropy. You can even invest into the thing and it doesn't move at all. It will actually degrade even further. So you have this entropy that you have to fight all the time, which is, constantly eating away from the software, from the system that you're building. So that's just one addition I wanted to make to Jeremy, that this is always there, this entropy, making things unordered, and you have to always put in energy back to keep it ordered and keep it running. And and if you grow and if you scale, this entropy is just sometimes even becoming unmanageable. So that's why you actually put like 100 people on the job and it just doesn't move, right? So, and it's really, really an amazing thing to see. But where I wanted to go at is, we have this notion of over-engineering, right? So this is something that we hear a lot, or that I heard a lot, after 8-9 years, and I say, okay, we should probably think about this and think about that, and think about that, and we want to have abstractions, not to have interfaces, but we want to have abstractions to hide decisions that are unstable behind these things, and trying to have a little bit a more social aspect into the software discussions instead of just having technical ones. And one way we're not talking about is under engineering. So I hear the term over engineering a lot, but I don't hear the term under engineering actually being used. But I think this is the much bigger problem that we have in the software industry, which is constant under engineering in our cases. And the question is always, how much do you invest in certain parts of the application? How important is it, right? And I mean, this importance is not static. This importance is moving. Strategic goals are changing. And I think here Wardley maps, but also the Cinefin framework is really helpful. So placing, we have the different areas where we have the complex, you software built once and run 1,000,000 times, but this build once is a really complex endeavor. You really have to, discover new things, experiment, understand how the things are working, understand how the people are interacting or other external systems are interacting with your new systems. But it will move, right? Over time, it will move into the complicated domain. And at some point, even from the complicated domain where you start to stabilize, where you start to approach it differently from a engineering perspective as well. So I think DDD is one way of how you get this isolated, partition or modularize your application or your system in a way that you can move it independently without friction. I think that was a really great quote, Jeremy. I really like that. But the movement across this complexity thing, so after 4 years of time, when the application or system has stabilized, it becomes different. There's going to be different ways of how you have to apply development effort. It's not going to be the same approach of, we need to experiment and go fast and understand and discover, but it's more about, okay, how can we standardize? How can we build interoperations with maybe other players in the system, especially in markets that are not volatile anymore, but whereas there's a few larger players in the market, and they have to at some point cooperate maybe in certain things. So it's not easy to answer that, and I think this is where we need to educate the business a bit, that it's not all the same story. It's not all agile exploration thing, or it's not all standardization, but making the business aware of this movement of the different systems, that they are moving on these lines, that we're now building these new systems. We have to invest and explore and discover, but at some point this will move on this timeline, and we have to stabilize, and then we have to standardize at some point in the end. But the business always thinks there's just one thing, and this is how it goes on. At least that was my experience at Flixbus, that the business had a hard time with understanding that the dynamics change, and I think that's something where we can focus on also in getting this across to the business people, that the approaches will change over time of how we do software development in certain parts of the system.
So for people this is what I meant with digital literacy. Yeah, we have to teach them, and they have to listen.
So for people wondering, it was the Kinevin framework by Dave Snowden, if you're listening and you want to Google a bit more about that. Before we go to you, Chris, one comment I want to make, what I see a lot, especially in the lean movement and maybe Scrum, right, is that there's one process to do software development in, and we're, who posted that today? I can't remember. It used to be an IT factory, and now it's an agile factory, right? As if you just pull features in and it will just drop out. And I think that's what you're explaining, right? Depending on the high complexity or low complicatedness, you change your approach, so you can also change the way you build software.
And you don't put the same people in charge of it,
depending
on the context, because some people are more explorative and want to discover, and some people are more into organizing, standardizing, and all that. And the explorer will get bored at some point, and it's better to change people and pass this part of the system to other people who will manage it far better than explorer, for instance, if it starts to be more stable.
Yeah, and I think Wortley talks about that, right, in Settlers, Pioneers, and Townspeople. So thanks, Thomas. Chris, you're up next.
I've been hearing people talk really about two different things I want to address. One is, how do we affect the change, how the projects work, how do we approach it? And then the other one, people are talking about, when do things get difficult to change? How does it become difficult to back out of a decision or modify it? And my metric, and I wrote this on my whiteboard for years, was, n plus m factorial is always larger than n factorial plus m factorial, which I eventually broke down to connectiveness. Things that can vary, that are overly connected, increase your complexity on the factorial. And the more complexity you have, the harder it is to understand it and correctly make changes. So as we can limit the number of connected things that affect the one component you're working on at any time, then it becomes simpler to modify it, safer to modify it, and faster. And you need to look at that at every level of the system. Because you look at some of these microservices, we put everything in microservices, but then look at our diagram, we have 500 interconnected microservices, right? And the messaging pattern looks like this. And all they've done is move the complexity up, but it's still all linked together. So managing that degree of connectiveness, anything over five factorial, I find you just can't understand it, right? And it just slows down everything you're doing. The other one, I'm hoping, seeing as Eric luckily is on the call here today, there's a video you did a long while back about refactoring enterprise systems and taking the top of the pyramid off and just building new features and letting the old system become a ball of mud, right? And not trying to always work inside the legacy that I had as required watching for teams for years, and now I just can't find a link to it anymore. So if somebody knows where to find that video, I'd love to put it back on my
Yeah, that was the
required
old
watching
Skills
list.
Matter, and it doesn't exist anymore.
Right. So we can find
Well,
that.
I'm pretty sure that I made that presentation more than once, so I think
Yes.
it might still be out there, or a minor variation. Some, you know, that makes that point must be out there somewhere.
Yeah, my Google foo is just weak. So more of a question for the whole group. If anybody can find it and share it, but it's about sometimes when you're building a new feature, like you were talking about, sometimes you need a new domain, you have to break off and build a new thing, and not sometimes it's you can't go and fix the old thing. You have to leave it behind and focus on the new.
And not take on the burden of rebuilding everything that anyone ever built.
Yeah, it's also, I think, in your after the book, it's on your website, Eric, about DDD for legacy patterns, right? You talk about the third strategy as well.
Right, that's a little paper that I wrote.
Yeah,
but I think to get the motivation across, the video is probably better. Yeah, but to get some concrete techniques, the paper is probably better.
Yeah,
but
oh, you're muted now, Eric.
Oh, I was just saying it was such a sad thing when all those Skills Matter videos became unavailable. I would say that it really happened well before Skills Matter disappeared, when they put it behind their sort of their account wall, not a paywall, but an account wall. That made a big difference. Broke a lot of links. But anyway.
Yeah, so my primary approach to answer the earlier question about how do you become and stay ready for changing things as things grow in these early decisions is keep your complexity low. And the primary thing I found to do that is reducing the coupling. The more things that can change, like a database table or change an object, then you have to consider all of them every time you make a change.
Yeah, I think
encapsulate, it goes away.
Yeah, I think Paul Rayner in the last, I think at the last DDD Europe gave a hands-on about connaissance of naming, which I think relates to what you're saying, Chris. Yeah. Right? What changes, what needs to change together. So thanks, Chris. So let's go back to the Star Trek Enterprise Architecture. Yves, you're raising your hand, right?
Yes, I was. Oh. Am I muted? Yes. So I'm going to take Eric on his word a few times on this topic. A few years ago, we had a model. So I was in HR government level. So money is, or let's say value has a different meaning there. But anyway, we had one system that helped people pass tests to prove their knowledge of language. I live in Belgium. We have 4 or 5 languages that we need to know, and people need to prove that. And the process, the business process in there is infinite. It doesn't have an end time. It's test. We make some report, test, and people go to there. They get exemption if they know this level of French. Then they get an exemption for something else. Lots of strange rules. And what we did, we decided, oh yeah, we need to do that for recruitment as well, selection processes and selection recruitment processes, and we choose exactly the same model. We built upon what was done for that language certification thing. That was the worst mistake ever. However, it worked for years. So when people say, oh, we took a bad decision, yes, it's painful to let that system evolve, up until the time when business is beginning to get creative with your system, and then you need to go to them and see what kind of pain they are having with that system to try to, okay, we need to break down the system, and coming back to Chris, break down the system into this and this and this, and then we can create a more malleable system that allows to create the business process that is needed. But it took a completely mind shift of us, of the business, a lot of discussion to understand exactly what they needed. It took years for me to understand that. And that's the thing. We had to go to that pain before understanding this is how the system should be, so that we can actually make the system evolve and keep up with whatever the business is doing. I'm not sure if I've been clear, but
yeah, I think so. And I think a big problem there, maybe you see it as well, Yves, is the learning aspect, right? It's great that you learn, but the industry as a whole, it's hard to share this and learn this emerging practices that you're talking about. It's hard to spread that and to
either you stay long in the place and then you see how the business evolve, because it's about how the business evolve, not how what we build evolve. It's what the business needs. So and the top of the pyramid is also there. Or you do, as James said at the beginning, call back or keep an eye on what's been done before, on what you have participated before. If people want to learn that skill, either you stay long and you live with the consequences, or you see them, or please call your team from 5, 6, 7 years ago. Ask them how it's going.
Yeah, so a little bit of understanding and how do you call it? Put yourself in another person's shoe.
Yep.
Yeah,
I
always.
One thing that can help a lot too is if we change the way we talk about legacy systems. Why are we so terribly negative all the time? You know, and we just legacy systems a bad thing. All those people made all these stupid decisions. This is holding us back. This is causing us problems. You know, if we just change that whole thing, the way we talk about it, the way we think about it, the legacy systems are the things that make the business succeed right now, right? And it's true that we may have outgrown them. We may need to change them or to move beyond them, but why are we so negative about them? That I think is really harmful to the discourse that you need in order to actually move forward. And it makes us feel bad about everything we did in the past. And I guarantee you all the things we build now will be the ones that work. The successful ones will be legacy systems in the future and people will probably whine about them. But
you can be proud if you're you need a certificate for that. I've built a legacy system
point many times.
And it's still here.
Systems are the successful systems of the past, right?
I have one small tip for that. Always write legacy with a capital L. Respect it. So, it's like legacy. It's a capital L.
But that's I think before we go to Jeremy, I think it was the same, Thomas, and I have the same, and I'm wondering if other people feel like that. You took a decision in the past, new people come in again, and you need to explain why that decision is taken, and you're sort of like excusing yourself that you made that decision. Like that's already negative. Well, actually, you need to be proud. Yes, I took that decision, and see, it's still running. Now we need to fix it. Let's do it. And I think you made a very good point there, Eric, because I feel myself in that trap as well a lot of time, excusing myself for some decisions I'm not proud anymore.
I would like to jump in quickly there. That's exactly a point that I dealt with when having these different cultural phases in my company, right? At some point, realizing that you will always have this generational gap that comes back and it always repeats. So what we did is to not have the feeling of excusing ourselves, we said we need everybody to be involved in the decision making and in the understanding. So new people have a fresh eye view. So let's model together what we have built in the past. And we did that for the last 6 or 7 years, and that worked really well. Every new one who came in, we showed them all our mistakes from the past and showed them the history of why the system is the way it is. So we have an actual presentation with a few flip charts where we can show this is how it grew, this is what we did, these are our heuristics we used, and this is what we're going to do today. And then getting their input on that and basically going to an event storming and stuff like that. But really doing it like a collaborative session of let's go through the history of why things became the way they are. And now let's figure out what would be better, what are the trade-offs, making it a collaborative modeling session instead of an educational, unidirectional flow of teaching them the system.
Yeah.
That's also when you said that, the number of times I've been sat in a system and someone has said, why did you make this decision? It was clearly wrong. And you go back and you look at it and it was clearly the very best decision that could have been made at that time. Absolutely correct.
Well, both statements are wrong, right? It's like, this is how I understand the trade-off. How do you see the trade-off? Let's learn together, instead of I'm right, you're wrong. That never helps.
And sometimes what you were trying to build was totally different. So it was the right thing to build.
Yeah, I think James makes a good point. And to Marco's, I mean, when I am involved in a place and I'm going to be looking at a system, and people do sometimes get really nervous and because we're going to, Eric's going to see all these mistakes we made, and they're often surprised that that I'm pretty positive about most of these things, and not though without saying, oh, that's not good, that's not good, but that you can do it in a way that says, it's almost like it's hilarious how many bad things there are in this system, because this system works and it does some great things. Look what you got to work. Look what you got to work. Of course, there's that. Oh, you're going to want to change that. Oh, there's this. I mean, I'm sure you want to change that. This you might not have noticed, but this is, it's actually doing that. That's something it's strange to me how hard this is for people to say, here's this extremely imperfect system that has lots of flaws in it. Some of them are real mistakes that were made that if you had thought a bit better at the time, you wouldn't have made it. Some of them are just, decisions that were right for the time and you totally moved on. But why does all this have to be so negative? These old systems, they make the business run. Our salaries are being paid by them right now. And while we build the successor, so don't apologize for it. Just, and the same goes for new stuff though. When people propose a new design, and you say, oh, that's just terrible. There's just everything wrong with it. I mean, why does it have to be like that, right? People propose a new design and then they put it in front of other people, and it's like really hard for them to do that. I've noticed that the first few times people show me their designs, they're really nervous. And then after that, they're not, because I'll say, oh yeah, well, that's interesting that you were trying to do this. At some point in the thing, I'll propose something that's even crazier, because if you really think about stuff, you can just, I don't know, I'll stop talking, but.
Yeah. So to go into that, before we go to Jeremy after, I get what you're saying, Eric. I'm now currently somewhere where 1 year ago, nobody was in on the decision, and now they're going fully at it because it's working. So back then it was like, no, it's never going to work. And now it's going to run the business in the future, right? So yeah, why don't we treat every idea equally present, even the ones you don't like, right? So Jeremy, you
yes, I wanted to talk about something else I learned on the way. This is Chris who was talking about keeping complexity low, and my view, more than 10 years ago, my view of keeping complexity low was about having a very homogeneous system with everything in the latest technology, with the same version and everything at the top of the art. And with time, I changed my view, and today I really enjoy systems that are very heterogeneous, with a lot of different parts, because we were talking about to be ready for change. And actually, when you have an homogeneous system, as soon as you change something, it's not homogeneous anymore. So actually, your system will be heterogeneous in some way over time. Some part will be messy, some part will be different. And if you try to over-optimize for homogeneity, your system is actually a bit weak to change, because you will not be able to integrate new parts. You will not be able to integrate with new technology. and you will be subject to a fragility if, for instance, the technology you're using is going obsolete. Everything becomes obsolete in a single movement. And if you have a heterogeneous system, it becomes very resistant to things that could happen in the future, because it's diverse. It's capable to integrate new things, like when you have a merger or something with a new company. If you still have 2 different or 3 different systems integrated with different technology, integrating a third or a fourth one is actually already, your system is already ready for this. So actually, I think, okay, it's a bit more complex in some way, because you have to know more things, but you don't have to overthink the specificity of each part. And you can just say, and in each part, it will just be some software written in some way, and I can manage that. So I think it makes system resistant. It reduces the blast radius in case of catastrophic event. Also for security, for instance, because an attack on a part of the system has to be different on each part, and if you have a part that breaks, the other parts will break differently, so probably they won't break at the same time. And this is really something I came to enjoy over the last year, to have a system composed of very different parts. I don't know what your experience about this is.
Well, in some ways, it enforces the separation, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't allow you to overcouple. You've got a mechanism that's limiting how much coupling can occur.
Yeah.
So it's just like baked in.
Exactly. Yeah, it's more difficult to create a false coupling, and it marks the boundaries more clearly. Also, so yeah, that's an interesting aspect of it. Also,
there's a balance to it, because if you go too much the other way, you have one microservice doing one left pad for everything, you know.
Yeah. Well, once again, the granularity of this has to be correctly sized based on the size of your system. As I said, if you have sand, it's difficult to move.
When you were talking about sand earlier and Chris was talking about connections, I was thinking about what happens when you get a piece of chewing gum in the sand, and trying to move the sand is impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a bit about, well, it's again about trade-offs, right? And I mean, Thomas, you earlier said under engineering, I don't see a lot of trade-off managing and options and risk management going on in a lot of teams nowadays. But I'm a bit biased as a consultant, so that probably is different from the teams I don't visit. So thanks, Jeremy. Thomas.
Yeah, so I want to talk about 2 things maybe. So the first thing is what really has the highest impact on how your application evolves is actually who you hire to work on it. That's what my biggest learning is. Actually, you can have standards and architectural rules and whatever. The most important thing that you can think of is actually who you hire to work on a system, and especially the first people who work on the system. So it sounds stupid, but it is like that. So the first people, they trample the path, and the others will follow. This is I've seen it multiple times now, that that this is the major decision: who you hire, what are their principles, how are they seeing software development? Are they domain-driven designers, or are they just gonna set up the database and do some scaffolding and off we go? I've implemented that. So this is more like if I had to give someone if I can only give one advice, then the advice would be really care about, who you hire to work on the system, because that will have the highest impact on how the system evolves, and what kind of options you have in order to move it, because it's not going to move by itself. It's always people who are going to put the work in. And I think we are underestimating that, right? So I often see that the hiring and, the pipelines, there's some recruiter somewhere who deals with that, but the teams are not really involved in it. Then they have maybe one small interview with the person to get them to know. And I think that's not enough, right? So you want to really focus on the people. You want to really focus on the social aspect of software development, because to me, this has actually the highest impact on how the software will evolve in the future.
Yeah. Because it's go ahead.
Who you hire at a certain point in time for the needs of the team at that moment.
Exactly.
Don't hire equally minded people, because that's going to give you an equally minded system. You need to hire for what you need now. I have been in teams where there are people who look forward and go talk to the business and try to understand and look at the bigger picture. And I have people who say, no, I just want to work on that feature. I want to work on that work. And the thing is, I need both of them. I need both people, because the type of work I need to do is diverse. So I need people who can look forward, and I can people who can care for the system as it is now. So
and that's why, and that's what I see as well. I'm considered an architect, but architects are usually maybe paid more or looked upon more in higher ranking. They're just doing different work, not higher work, in my opinion, in a team.
Yeah.
It's same as a tester, same as a Q, whatever, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone needs to go on that path to becoming, well, I don't know, manager, architect.
And the thing is also that at some scale, when you start to have more than 2 or 3 development teams, you cannot be in control of everything that will happen. So you have to delegate architecture locally and design locally. So you have to create autonomous teams who can work and take good architectural decisions locally without referring to you for everything they have to do. And this is where you have to find to form teams that are correctly minded in a way that when you express the constraints of the system to them, after that they can take a lot of good decisions alone. And when you do that, you can focus on more aspect of the system without being in micro control of the architecture. And at the same time, if you want this to be effective, you have to set some principles so that even if people make some mistakes, it's not very impactful. So you can let them decide locally, make some mistakes locally, because it will not break the overall system. So you have something to a design that will be error proof, so that people can experiment and be confident in the decisions they take, and then just set them some triggers to call you when they are in trouble, so that it doesn't grow too big. But
and that's what you mentioned earlier on about the blast zones, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Blast radius, at runtime, but also at design time in the team organization, so that you cannot have a team that will break the whole system with bad decisions. So in this, when you have that, teams become more easily autonomous, because they know they are in a safe space to experiment and to take decisions. So they don't have to come to you for every small decision. They can just learn and progress, and you help them in the process, but they can work without you also.
I just want to quickly add something here. Why I want to make the addition that the people you hire today will be the rule makers of tomorrow, right? So like somebody who joins the company now, he's not going to be senior people, but maybe 3-4 years down the line, I'm not sure about the others. Like I would like to hear like what the average employee retention currently is, because that's I think another problem that like large companies have is actually to retain the talent within the organizations and actually have people who have spent 3 or 4 years there that are coming at the level to actually understand the global complexities of the system and actually be part of some kind of giving advice to the teams in order to, I mean, you can delegate decision, but you need that guardrails, Jeremy, right? You said, right? You need these principles, the guardrails that that help the teams not fall off the cliff when they make a decision. So again, I believe that it's really important that we don't care enough about the people, which people we hire. Normally we focus on the technical stuff a lot, but the hiring process is something HR came up with and we're kind of doing it. And I think we should actually turn that around and actively designing these hiring processes. And it's also like, it's the same thing with the Scrum for everyone. It's the same thing, hiring process for all the teams. It's the same, that's the same problem. It's the same thing. And I think we need to give much more attention to the people and to the hiring in our organization, especially in the larger organizations, because their HR normally is very keen on, we're gonna have one single process and standardization and everything, so they love it, and it's sometimes a hard fight to get it back. But I think teams need to take this back into their hands and design a matching hiring process to really find the right people to help the team going forward. I think we can really make a difference there, because that's what I have made the experience in the past, that often the teams are not enabled to do that. And the hiring part is just, something they have to do on the side, instead of seeing it as a major role of the team to actually drive this by themselves.
Yeah. I want to quickly throw in that, like you said, we have to, as if it would be the only way people are doing it, right? But there's a lot of companies out there nowadays that promote psychological safety as a first principle in hiring and also development. So it's getting better, right? It's not every company is there, but there's more and more companies taking psychological safety majorly into account.
Yeah, exactly.
They are there, but I mean, not enough yet.
No, and it's a two-way street, because also the one you hire gets expectation that they don't get. Well, we got another team for you that we're placing you. It's like resources, anyone, right? There's a paper machine that's empty. We're gonna put you there.
Don't say that word, Chris.
No, I know, but that's the mindset. Yeah. So I wanted to go to Chris as a thank you.
Okay. So actually, I'm responding to something that occurred to me. I was listening to what Jeremy was talking about before. When I first, sort of realized about these long-term impacts of decisions, I was writing telephony test tools to test, signaling systems and call centers, and we're building this toolkit we're reusing for projects again and again. And the problem is we need the test to keep running even when the system fails, so we get all the results, right? And what I wound up doing is what I later called building tanks. So I kept on adding complexity and decisions to try and make sure it never fell over. But the problem is we were testing brand new hardware and software that had never been set up before, so I couldn't predict everything. And so the big change I made, I realized that this architectural decision that it could never go down was costing me more and more. And I switched to canaries, right? And that was like a canary in a coal mine. So instead I made everything, changed the whole approach, where if anything went wrong, it just reported it and fell over.
Yeah.
And something else would watch it and stand it back up. Right. And so that was really like the big architectural change. And the first time I really got into, hey, this decision made early on can really grow and grow in ways I didn't expect.
Yeah, because the thing is that when you try to avoid problems at all costs,
Right.
the thing is that you people have to be careful. And actually, when you have to be careful, you're in a bad position.
Right.
This is about convexity. When you are at the top of a cliff, you have to be careful not to fall. Okay.
Right.
But when you are at the bottom, there you can run freely and there is no problem and you can go fast. And if you go in the wrong direction, you will go back just by gravity to the right place. Where when you are at the top of the cliff, any wrong move will make you fall. So you want to be at the bottom in the bottom of the curve. And
so we
when you place people in that position, they can move. They are not afraid to. You can put some bar, some walls or something to avoid people, to make people safe. But just put them in a position where they cannot fall or get hurt.
So yeah, it suddenly became every use case was write the happy path, and then if anything goes wrong on the happy path, fail with an intelligent error message and get out of there.
Yeah.
Somebody else will stand you up again. It was so much easier and faster.
Yeah.
The other thought was I realized there's another thing I share with the business all the time to explain some of the of what's going on. If it's okay for me to share my screen for 1 second.
Go ahead. You're allowed to. Should be possible.
So I show the business this and I say, we've got one feature and we have a second feature and then the third feature, fourth, and then the fifth. So they just see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but the software can see incredibly more complexity, right? That's the factorial growth. And that's where you get these. That's a real production database, red gate diagram, and that one table controls everything. And that makes somebody a lot of money. That's a very successful legacy system, but you don't want to work on it. So I show this to the business, and it's a very simple, follow the steps, and I'm like, this is when we need to refactor. Because now we need to, because we put 6 in here, it just doesn't go anywhere good. And that was all I wanted to share with people, was I found that very compelling in a conversation with the business and some of my junior developers.
Thanks for sharing. So we're running 1.5 hours in, so we're gonna take 2. Well, we haven't got a lot of questions because a lot of hand raised, which is great. I have 2 more questions to end today, and the first one is a personal one, which I like. So Mary Poppendijk shared, like, you want to take decisions at the least possible moment, right? Where Rebecca Wirsbrough says, well, I want to make them at the earliest responsible moment and then revisit them from time to time. So the question that Eve popped up here is, like, what kind of feedback loop do you put in place for that, getting that feedback loop in, right? Can anyone share a personal story how they do that, or some heuristics, or how do I check that decision?
When I've got a decision that I want to defer or might defer, I don't allow myself to defer the decision without knowing when it needs to be made by. What is the constraint? You can't defer a decision unless you know when the first or last responsible moment is. Otherwise, you need to take an early decision on it. So I find that's the one big thing. And then the other one is, I do prefer to defer the decision, because if you don't, your first thought will stick with you more than you think, right? So you've got to I find myself, I've got to actively say, no, I'm not deciding. I'm very actively not going to pick until X occurs. Either I have enough information or I have a risk. Either one of those could trigger making the decision. That's my methodology.
Thomas.
Yeah, so I mean, we actually made it really concrete because what we did is, I mean, we started running ADRs within the teams and, you know, educating the teams to actually, you know, use them and write them. And we have this, you know, we're running on GitLab in our organization, and we have this bot who collects all these ADRs and who puts it basically on a information radar, right? So we have this kind of tech, like the tech radar, but, you know, decision radar, you could call it, basically, where the teams are notified when there is a new decision made. And we also have a quarterly process where, you know, we are organized, where our organization is, we're organized in business capabilities or domains, you can call it, right? But we are also having a matrix organization overlaying that, right? So within each domain, we have a matrix organization, and there's, you know, a few, there's like an architecture chapter or whatever, some kind of community of practice where architects are coming together. And these architects go around the teams every quarter, and they do a review of the decisions that have been made within the teams, and then they just discuss. It's not about finger pointing and it's right or wrong, or, you know, it's just about, if you want to start a behavior within the teams, you need to do it regularly, so the teams, you know, start doing it, because the only thing that, you know, gets you learning or into the mindset is the frequency and repeating it and doing it.
You gotta flex the muscle.
Yes, right? Exactly. And this is how we currently do it, and it works pretty well because it is still in the local scope, right? So it's like probably 3, 4, 5 teams per matrix organization within the business capabilities. So it's manageable for these people to do it. You don't have this one architecture team that goes around the whole organization and tries to do it, which would be absolutely impossible. But this is something that has worked for us, to you know, get the teams, revisit them, and get advice from more experienced people, and also have this decision radar pollinating also other teams outside. So we found that this kind of worked pretty well. Is
this something open sourced, that radar?
No, unfortunately, it's not.
Unfortunately. Hint, hint. Thanks for sharing, Thomas.
We want
James. Yeah, I want it. So James, go ahead.
So,
Thanks for sharing, Thomas.
The concept of sort of like the last responsible moment to make a decision at the point at which you have to make it, right? But the reason that you're doing that is because you have the most information to make that decision. The first responsible moment is when you have enough information to have some idea as to which way you're going in there. But you can't possibly say that it's the first responsible moment until you know what's going to cause you to change it. Because if you can't make a decision unless you know what's going to really cause it to change. The other thing which I meant to say earlier, but unless you've got more than one choice, you're not making a decision. You're going down a path which has been predestined for you. And if you don't have enough information to make an actual decision about which direction you're going, you're not making a decision, you're taking a guess.
Yeah. And it's also a bias if you just take one thing in isolation, right? One option in isolation. Yeah. Is that what you're going to?
Yeah, and the biggest difference for me between someone whose primary focus is on architecture and someone whose focus is on something else is that an architect is generally having to sort of like keep thinking about all of those decisions and what, you know, is it the right time to make it? Is it the right time to rethink it? Do I actually know enough to make the decision? Is there actually enough knowledge within? Do I know enough to make a decision or to even have any influence on it? Do we as a group know enough? There's all sorts of stuff, and it's the way I sort of like talk about it is often when you're writing code, you're kind of looking down close to you. When you're testing, you're looking at what you're doing close to you. when you're sort of like doing the architecture part of the role, you're looking much further ahead, the road you want to take and where you want to go. And you might switch between all of those lots of times during a day. But there are different focuses.
Thanks. Nice add. Yves.
On the question of what kind of feedback, how do you install feedback loop? So I've been in places for very long. One thing I did is build a system and support it. I've been on rotation for support, first line, not second line, not third line, first line, to experience exactly what people using the system are facing. So that's one way of realizing what you're doing, not only to your team, but also to or the impact you have on people using the system and the kind of question they face. And it's really interesting because it forces you to improve the system in somehow. Because when there are recurring questions coming, it gets boring, and we don't like to be bored. So that's one thing that you can do is go and talk to people, or if you can't do rotation or it's not possible, go and talk to other type of users of your system, because they will give you feedback about, hey, this is working great, or this is not working great. One way is, how many tickets do you get in? What's the severity of those tickets if you want feedback on your system?
Thanks. Jeremy?
Yeah, and to add to what Yves just said, there is the runtime part of the system running, and being in managing the system in production directly is very important to know if the system is running correctly, and also to actually code with the teams. After 14 years, I'm still writing code every day. I go with teams, I embed with teams which have the most important architectural decision to take, and I worked with them for several months embedded in the team, so that you take some decision, but you take the hit if it's bad decision, but you take the hit with them. So it's very important. Yes.
Yeah.
And this way, if it was a mistake, you are at the front seat to see what's happening and to change the decision. Yes.
So if the decision doesn't impact you, then don't take that decision as a person, right? That's a nice heuristic.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
And then let the team decide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Thomas. You're on mute.
Yes. Thanks, Kenny. I think another, because we're coming to the end, I wanted to share this as well. I think also, if you're working long with one system, you're becoming an expert in modernization as well, which is coming as a requirement, because you're constantly evolving, redesigning, and migration is always the big point, right? How can you keep the system running and transforming it from something that Eric has called, something that makes the money, but we can, you see already the end. You can see the end. It's coming, and you can foresee it. So this is a cash cow, but we can see the end. We can see the end coming. So we need to do something else. How can we transform it while keeping it running, while keeping making that money? And I think this is something that you need to do multiple times, because you will have to apply different patterns on every step on the way. Sometimes strangling the application is the right way. Sometimes copy and change is the right way. So there's a lot of different ways of how you can start modernization journeys within your system. I think one thing, and I think that will be help me dramatically in my future career, is actually being able to modernize like different systems at different stages and different technologies with different databases and different interaction modes, And I think for the people who will stay longer with the system, it's a really important to educate yourself on the different patterns that you can apply, and understanding how the different modernization and transformation patterns can be useful and when they are not so useful. So this is also something that I just wanted to mention quickly in this round.
Thanks. So I see another question, but I think we might take that up for a next session about emerging and evolution in the architecture, because else we're spending another 1.5 hours. So thanks for that question. We'll take it along for a next session. But I want to end today's session. So first of all, thanks so far for staying with us. But we have Eric here. It's been 19 years since the book got published, and there was a question on the Miro board, and anyone can answer this, by the way. But years ago, the IT wanted to build central systems like databases, central print systems. Today, people take decisions to move towards a domain-driven design approach, right? Which, well, again, getting into context, was 19 years ago since the book got published. So now people take that decision. How to say this DoD approach is not only a new phase which will be over in 5 or 10 years. So how can we revisit that? Does it stay? Does it stick? Or how can we revisit that decision people are making to moving into domains, bounded context patterns, etc.? So who dares to look into the future and map this out?
I'm not going to dare to look into the future. I just want to say that central system or decentralized system has nothing to do with the fact that you care about the language, that you care about the boundaries within the system. I mean, the centralized, decentralized thing, it's a phase that every 10, 15 years, it's coming back and coming. And why? Because we build, and then, oh, actually, it's doing one thing. This is becoming less complicated, let's say, and we move on to the next thing, which is built next to it. So, so the question is a bit difficult, actually, because it's not about being centralized, right? Or decentralized.
No, that's a polarity that you cannot solve. I mean, if you go centralized, you get negativity. If you go decentralized, you get the negative trade-offs there.
I believe the phase this DDD phase it's not over and will never be over, but there is not really a phase, because the meaning of DDD has changed so much over the last, I don't know, 15 years. I mean, the basic fundamental blocks are the same, but all of these, surrounding things, how do we do product development? How do we structure the organizations, Conway's Law and everything? How do we actually psychological safety, diversity, all of these things that, are around. You cannot see it separately from these things. And I think we have passed that, I'm doing domain-driven design and that's it. I don't think that's going to be how you have, it's not going to work like that, because you cannot see it just in isolation. You have to see all the things that are surrounding it, and it's, overlapping on a lot of different areas. And I think we will in the next years, we will find new things that are overlapping with other things, and it will just, the layers will grow, and we will climb the abstraction ladder even higher until, that's my opinion on this.
Who sees it different or slightly different, or who can agree with him? I see Christina raising your hand, so
yes to all your questions. Yeah, I see it slightly different, and I agree.
Good.
Yeah, I think DDD is a means. It is not the silver bullet, but I don't know how to work without it. But of course, without transparency, without the cultural problems, without realizing that the people who we're hiring are making impact, we won't go anywhere. So But if we solve this, or if we have already the right mindset, then my argument is DDD is makes me making decisions based on the business. So I don't make decisions based on how is the weather today. What else can somebody give me to be so near to the how the business, how the market is moving as DDD?
So
this is my argument pro DDD.
Because we like language and explicitness, Christina.
No, because
you mean the business? No, I mean the business is not a department or business. It's actually the thing you're doing it for, right?
Yeah. The product is not a piece of software. The product is we all, the people who are operating it, the people who are responding to the phone, who are selling it, or the customers. So if we don't work together, we are seeing software, and other departments, then we will have this big ball of mud, and we won't be able to be fast enough. And if the market is changing, we won't even know it, because we will think about Postgres or MySQL and not about why is the market changing and what we need to do. And we'll get this latest point of decisions. If we are together, we are moving together, then DDD can give us these options without knowing them yet. I posted the link to the DDD one-pager. There are parts of that what Thomas was saying, the community, the social part on this one-pager. So this is an argument too.
Yeah, and of course, if you're into predicting weather, you do care about the weather as a business.
But I fully agree with everything Christina said. I think we just need to be careful that domain-driven design is not the point, right? That we need to be careful not to oversell the thing by the name. So I think many people think like, hey, should I invest in DDD or not? And that's the wrong discussion, because we should invest in software quality and in solving complex problems, and everything the domain-driven design community is doing and everything that the books are bringing is helping a lot in solving those problems. But it's not about DDD. It's about those problems and how to solve them. So the term right now is a really good term, accumulating a great community, accumulating great conferences, great books. But it's not about, is DDD still around in 10 years? Maybe we call it different then. Doesn't matter, right? It's the mindset stays the same. So there's continuous learning, collaborative learning, finding heuristics to solve complex business problems, discussing trade-offs. That's the important part.
Yeah.
Not the
and I think
title. Sorry.
No. Sorry, so that's I think before we go to James, that's the biggest heuristic I think shared in the entire DDD community. You don't talk about DDD. You ask for, oh, what's your problem? What do we need to solve? And then you start applying the patterns without mentioning DDD. So that's the way you can start. So James.
Yeah, I was just going to say software is primarily a social endeavor in order to get enough information to do something, to make a dumb piece of hardware do what you want it to do. And for me, DDD has always been a communication tool to help with that social endeavor, to get the information I need to be able to build a system that's the right kind of thing. It's not like, I never really saw it as a sort of like a development methodology or anything like that. Far more just a set of tools to help me figure out how to start speaking the same language as the people asking for the system that were asking for a system to be built, because I didn't know what they were talking about.
Yes. Thanks. And that's a wrap up for today. I would like to thank DEdge, Jeremy, and also Yves for starting this whole discussion. Yeah. And I would like to thank all the panelists and everyone who asked questions, gave input on all the chats, and shared your stories. Thank you. We're gonna close the stream, but keep talking a bit afterwards. And in a few weeks, we have the next session planned again, which we'll be publishing pretty soon in the next week. So keep an eye out for that. It will be around the 19th of April. And hope to see you next time. And thanks a lot.